I'm going to share something with you that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. And I have never heard this anywhere else. Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk about the coming market crash. We're going to be talking about civil unrest. We're going to talk about the superbug, aka C virus. We're going to talk about race relations. We're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff, defunding the police, all of that good stuff. So stay tuned. If you're new to this channel and you're wondering what the hell is this channel about? Well, this channel is about preparedness and survival. Up until about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I guess, the majority of my videos were all about how-to survival stuff, gear reviews, but I did also do what I called a pocket talk. That was hypothesizing about the myriad situations that might present themselves if we found ourselves in a situation that we have been in the last 4 months. Although you could argue that this last 4 months has been a light version of what we call shit hits the fan. Now, if you notice that on some of my videos there's a red bar and on some there's a blue bar. The blue bar videos are the more pragmatic videos. They're all about how to, they're clear, they're direct. They're what YouTube calls hero content, perennial content that you can watch 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now and it will still be relevant. Videos like this that have a red strip on the side, it's not that they're necessarily not going to be relevant, but they're more free-form monologue type videos where, you know, there's not a lot of post-production, so there's not a lot of fancy visuals and stuff like that. Focus, 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 focus. Can we focus? There we go. These videos seem to get more attention in the short term. They get a lot more views, but those views quickly fall off a cliff after about 2 or 3 days. Whereas the perennial blue videos that I make, they tend to not do as well at the start, but over time, they continue to attract viewership. So, you know, I try to mix it up, but lately it's been more red videos. You're probably going to be offended by some of the things I say in this video. Some people are so easily offended, which is why I'm probably not going to read the comments on this video, because if I have a bad day and I'm stressed out and I dive into the comment section, I may just have to interact with some of the naysayers out there, and it doesn't always end constructively, we'll say. So I'm just not going to do it. So don't take offense if I don't comment on this video, but feel free to argue with one another. So we're going to be talking about the market. So the market took a big hit the other day. The Dow was down 1,800 points, and all the other indexes were down more or less to the same extent. Myself and others have been talking about the bubble that's been inflating with stimulus money, essentially. Stimulus not only in the form of the Fed buying up this corporate debt, but also in the form of the retail investor, the Robinhood investor, that is pumping all their money into these very high-risk stocks. And it's just turned into a casino, basically, the stock market in the last couple months. Here's my prediction with the stock market. Everybody wants to know predictions. I'm not a financial analyst. Don't take my advice. You know, if you want me to do a video about a financial strategies video, I suppose I could do that. It's a big deviation from what I typically talk about on this channel, but maybe I could do that at some point. But my predictions for the market are as follows. So we're going to have some corrections like this, but I don't think we're going to get the big crash until fall. I think that the market is going to move sideways. That means it's not going to go up. It's not really going to go down. It's going to go up and down. It's going to be some extreme volatility over the next few months. But come fall, that's when we're going to see some extreme turbulence, because I do think that the second wave, the true second wave, not what people are calling the second wave right now, which really isn't a second wave. What's happening right now in these other states is the first wave, but because they were on lockdown, the first wave wasn't able to take root. So it's the same strain from the first wave. So that, as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, so go and do more research, but based on the research I've done, waves of viruses are seasonal, and they're based on mutations in the strain, significant mutations which make you even susceptible even after you've gained immunity in the first wave, or it mutates so that it has a larger population which is susceptible to it. So if that was to happen, the Fed will not have any more leverage come fall time. Please focus, focus, focus. I think it's focusing on the steering wheel. There we go. So if that happens in the fall, what we're going to see is up until that time, the Fed is going to keep the market propped up, and the silly Robinhood investor is going to stay at the table, because it's like gambling. It's an addiction. The stock market now in its current form is very much a process addiction for a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to get burned. I mean, when you're betting that bankrupt companies are going to go up in value, I mean, now Hertz is creating more shares of its company even though it's gone bankrupt, because it realized, hey, people are apparently really stupid nowadays and they're willing to buy this dead stock. The Fed comes out, they basically sneeze and everybody jumps. I mean, they can basically come on and say anything. They can just mutter an ambiguous statement, and all of a sudden the market either goes up or down. So we are really in a speculative space right now, which has no rooting in reality, and we have not been grounded yet. Far from it. Personally, I think it's way overvalued and it's going to come crashing down. Now, that doesn't mean much for the guy on Main Street who's already lost his job. And, I've been talking to some non-preppers lately, and it's amazing how, people had no conception that something like this could ever happen. They just thought that, they could never lose their job. There could never be a recession. There could never be a shutdown like that we've seen, or something on the magnitude and scale that would really throw a wrench into civilization as we know it, cause them to have to, be more resilient and look for other ways to survive or make a living. And so it's really interesting to see that dynamic unfold. But there is a huge time lag, I'm finding. Like the mindset I was in February and March, people are in that mindset now. Whereas I've kind of come out of my February, March mindset, because I got a better understanding of what's going on. So there's a huge time lag. I knew that a lot of people were walking around in a somnambulist state, where just sleepwalking, through life in a sense, in terms of not being aware that if it wasn't for the concrete matrix of that surrounds them, that they would not be able to survive. That you can't survive if the supply chain breaks down. A lot of people had no conception of where they were in the world, of how they actually fit into the natural world. But now people are starting to realize that. So that is interesting unto itself. Let's talk about this whole civil conflict stuff. There's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot to unpack. What's that saying? Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. I'm going to talk about why you should never, ever politicize racial issues or socioeconomic issues. Here's the reason why you never do that. Right when you politicize any issue, you can bet that nothing will ever be done that seriously moves the needle on that issue. Take poverty, for instance. If you have a party which claims to represent the poor, do you think that they're ever going to make fundamental changes that improve people's socioeconomic situation? If they did, do you think that those people, once they've moved up the ladder a little bit, do you think that maybe they will change their vote for a party which now which reflects their new socioeconomic level that they've reached? Of course they will. Right when something becomes politicized, whether it's firearms rights, pro-life or pro-choice, race relations, whatever the case might be, you can bet that both sides benefit from the polarization. So if the situation gets resolved, then the political party loses its legitimacy. So if there's no more poverty, then you don't need a party which claims to represent the underclass or the oppressed peoples, right? You don't need that. So that's why nothing is ever going to change. And the next thing I'm going to say is going to be controversial with some of my audience, but you need to just hear me out. This whole defunding the police thing. A lot of people are taking it the wrong way, and they're really trying to politicize it. And I'm going to talk about Trump's comments about the military and the Second Amendment and all that stuff in a little bit. I'll save that for later, if anybody's still here by then. Here's what you need to know about defunding the police. Without crime, there would be no police. You wouldn't need the police. Without broken families, without dysfunctional families, without domestic violence, you wouldn't need social workers. Without people making poor lifestyle choices and thus poor choices about their health, you wouldn't need as many doctors. Without these crises, you wouldn't need these occupations. In order for these occupations to keep their budgets high, you essentially need more crisis. If there was no crime in a town, you couldn't justify adding more police officers to the force. If there was, less patients coming in because the whole population was healthy and they all exercised and they all ate well, then you would need less doctors. You wouldn't need as many nurses. You wouldn't need as many janitors and, cafeteria workers to work in the hospital. You just wouldn't need all those services. And the same thing goes for any government-funded occupation that essentially relies on bad shit happening. So this is the problem, is that a lot of people out there want to keep their jobs. And in order for their jobs to remain legitimate, they basically need crime or they need bad stuff to happen. So I understand the philosophy of defund the police from a libertarian, conservative perspective. And I'm not I just think that the goal should be less government spending. And if you look at, the amount of money spent on things like the military and the police and the corporal aspects of our society, it's a lot. It's a lot more than we spend on things like education. So I understand the basic premise, but you see how they're playing it up. They're playing it up so that they can get the people who should be arguing for that very thing, the libertarian group, who should be saying, the whole point of us owning our own firearms and being, stewards of our own land and, having the individual rights and freedoms and personal responsibility is so that we can take care of ourselves if shit hits the fan. Not that we can be vigilantes, but that we can mind our own house, that if something came up, we don't have to necessarily rely on 911 to deal with it, okay? So the idea that you're supporting, giving more money to the government to do that. And I just got a letter from the RCMP here saying that now they're going to take away some of our firearms. So that really pisses me off when people say, we need to give more money to the police. It's like, okay, for all of the police officers out there who watch my channel, I do respect what you do. I genuinely respect what you do, especially the good ones, the genuine good ones who are educated, who have to go through more training, who, there's a higher standard to get onto the force. I appreciate those officers. And even the ones who don't necessarily have to meet those standards, but do a good job of what they do and genuinely want to, make the world a better place or just want to help people out. And, remember what their role is. Remember that we pay them to keep us safe. That's the role of a police officer, okay? But you need to understand how it can become a corrupt thing. Why is it that, if the private prisons were getting a little low in clientele, that they would have to go and do sweeps just so that they can fill up these prisons so that they could get subsidies from the government or whatever it was, okay? Don't be so triggered, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to divide people. They're really trying to divide people right now, and it's working marvelously. And with regards to Trump, here's what I think about Trump. I think that Trump has the capability more than probably any president that we've had in a long time to unify the masses, because his base is so galvanized behind him that he has an opportunity with this whole George Floyd thing to exact some really important change. But instead, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. He's just going to, fan the flames of unrest even more and get people more divided and fighting, because that's what politicians do. Because they know if you're not all riled up and, pissed off at a bunch of disgruntled, youth, early 20s people, anarchists who, what they're doing is not going to amount to anything. The military could go into that 6-block thing in Seattle and clear that up in an afternoon. That's nothing, okay? It's not going to amount to much. I'm not saying that, ideologically speaking, seeds are not, being planted, but I also think that there's a lot more to the story. Everything's more nuanced. Never just think that it's black and white. That's why I really hate when people try to pigeonhole me into one end of the political spectrum. To a staunch conservative, I'm a liberal, even though I'm just a moderate. And to a hardline liberal, I'm a conservative. And I assure you, I get as many, criticisms from both sides of the spectrum. So what am I? I'm a reflection of what you are, is what I am. So I'm seeing these videos of YouTubers who are grinding their teeth because they want a civil war and all this stuff. And it's like, man, like any veteran who's had to take the life of somebody, you don't see them coming on here talking about that stuff. You just don't. In fact, quite the opposite. Anybody even who's probably been in the line of duty and seen some stuff, probably doesn't want that either, because they know what the end result is going to be. Now, in terms of the racial component of that, that's a big video unto itself. I'm going to say this. If you are a person who is in a disadvantaged situation socioeconomically, you grew up in a poor neighborhood and you struggle with adversity and some systemic barriers are in your way, know this, that hard times make strong men and that good times make weak men. That is very evident in our society today. So don't despair about your situation. There's a reason why a lot of these, I'm just going to say it, white kids, who grow up in the suburbs, they go and do these extreme sports, jump out of airplanes and, what's the wingsuits and just crazy shit that they do, right? The reason why they do that, they probably wouldn't do that if they grew up in the hood, because that is your wingsuit experience every day, trying to get to school and not getting shot or trying to be coaxed into some gang or just trying to keep on the straight and narrow. That is your extreme sport when you grow up, not just if you're a black youth, but anybody who's growing up in an impoverished neighborhood, that's your extreme sport. So it's not surprising to me that people go for these extreme, activities as a way to, test themselves. So don't despair if you've been born in one of these environments, because remember, the majority of really successful people are self-made. They come from the bottom. I gotta stop this video and start a new reel here because we're running out of tape. One sec. Now, in terms of the systemic thing and the implicit bias thing and the unconscious bias, look, those things do exist, but at the same time, they're not the only problem. We have to tackle the problem holistically, a multi-pronged approach. That means it's not enough to just defund the police. It's not enough to just, do some affirmative action thing or something like that. And I don't even necessarily believe in affirmative action. In Saskatchewan here, we have something called employment equity. That means that if you have two people who are of the same education, that they have to be at the exact same qualifications across the board, then in that case, if you had a person who was like an Aboriginal person and a white person, if the Aboriginal person, which was underrepresented in that field, which 99% of the time here they are, you would give the job to them. So you're not just getting the job because of your skin color or something like that. You're getting it because of your qualifications. But it's taking into account any systemic barriers that are in place. Now, we need to be more proactive. And there's that whole thing that, black people kill more black people than police kill. Sure, okay, but that doesn't mean that, the police can't be professional. Okay, you pay the police to be professional. And the problem with having too many police is that it almost antagonizes. It's like you rattle the hornet's nest even more, okay? So if we really want to solve the problems that are causing all these things, we really have to look at the big picture if we want to make effective solutions to these problems. Okay, so let's talk about being black in North America. I'm half black. I can understand the experience, probably not to the same extent as somebody who lives down in the South, but I can relate. I'm going to share something with you that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else, and I have never heard this anywhere else. If you look at the progression of how black families were depicted in film, on television, over the last 50 years, it has changed dramatically. Let's go back to Sanford and Son or the Jeffersons, moving on up. That was the whole motto. We're moving on up. We're starting to, be at parity because now, the civil rights movement happened and we're starting to, get what's ours, right? And then you go to the Cosby Show in the 1980s, where you have the depiction of a black family, a doctor, a lawyer, in respectable, high social status occupations depicted on mainstream TV. One of the biggest shows of the 80s by far, probably if not the biggest, okay? You had shows like Family Matters, where you have a black family and at the helm of the family is a cop, right? And every episode there's like a moral to the story. It's always positive. It's always family oriented, incredibly positive role models. And in those two shows in particular, you almost never hear about the fact that they're black. In those two shows, their blackness almost never comes up as a plot talking point or as something which is driving the plot, like is the case nowadays. Nowadays, almost every movie, every TV show, every episode, there's some reference to the fact that the person is black. And people will argue, well, this is to draw attention to certain issues. But here's my problem with that. In those times, when you had those shows like the Cosby Show, they showed people as people. They showed those families not as black families, just as families. And when I was a kid, and I'm sure this was the case with a lot of other kids who were my age in the 80s, whether you were white or black, you just watched them. They were just like a family on TV. Okay, you weren't watching a black family because attention wasn't being drawn to that fact every single frickin' episode. They were just a family on TV. If you want to normalize the upwardly mobile, high social status black experience in America, you need to put role models on TV that every second line isn't a reference to their heritage or to the fact that they're black. Family Matters, there was only one episode of that show that I recall. Maybe there's more, maybe I've forgotten. But as far as I know, there was only one episode where they talked about the issue of racism. Okay? And that's understandable because it was a life lessons type show. You want to show it once or twice, but not every episode. So they could focus on having actual plots to the stories. You know what I mean? And the same thing is true with like movies. Like in the 90s, one of my favorite, the only really superhero movie I really liked for some reason was Blade. And it wasn't because he was black. It was just because it was a cool movie. It was a cool idea, And there was no, I don't even think there was any, I think there was one line in the video where he says, always bet on black or something like that. I think that was just Wesley Snipes' kind of I'll be back tagline. But now you have Black Panther and everybody's, and really, does that really help? The only superhero you get is somebody who, is just all about being black. Why not just a superhero who's black but has a different special power that has nothing to do with the fact that they're black? So if you want to normalize that sort of experience, you need to not talk about it. And that's what Morgan Freeman said when he was asked about how do you resolve racial issues? He said, don't talk about it. And people said, well, how do we draw attention to these issues? And he said, if you don't talk about it, or what he was implying, I'm presuming, is that if you want to see people as human beings, you need to treat them like that first. You don't put black as a prefix to their experience. Okay? I'm telling you the real stuff here, man. I could go on and on about this stuff 4 hours. We've only scratched the surface with this. So what I'm trying to say is, tying back in to my initial thing about how if they don't politicize it, then they lose your vote. And the same thing holds true with this. There's that Gambino video, This Is America. In that video, all of the cars in that video are from the late 1970s or mid 80s. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the symbolism there was to show the state of arrested development that the black community has essentially been in since that time. Because if you don't know, the socioeconomic situation for black people in the United States is not getting better. It's getting worse. And that has only been amplified by this recent virus in which a higher proportion of black people lost their jobs. This is the problem, is that they're keeping you poor to get your votes. And I'm not saying they, as in it's like a conspiracy or anything like that, but you look at like the music industry, man. Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre, a handful of record producers, industry moguls are the ones who have basically took hip-hop, which was originally a very positive thing. There was definitely some components of it being used to resist, oppression and talk about, the black experience of being kind of downtrodden in the late 70s and stuff, early 80s. But it was morphed into F the police. And right when that happened, right when you put that wedge, I'm not saying that, that wasn't a real experience of people who lived in that time, that they didn't have to deal with that sort of systemic violence against them. But right when you cross that line, it kind of started to glorify the gangster culture. And now it's reached levels which, I don't think anybody could have ever thought back then. To see guys like Tekashi 6ix9ine or, that's probably not even the worst of it. That's just scratching the surface. It became all about debauchery and bitches and hoes and just completely anti-intellectual culture in the gangster rap, hip hop kind of thug culture. And that is what has been driving culture. And unfortunately, that's what people are inadvertently trying to defend in a lot of ways, which you shouldn't be trying to defend. Like those shows I talked about in the 80s, A Different World, which depicted, black people going to university. It was in a college campus setting. That one had a bit more racial stuff, and it came around after The Cosby Show. And you also have this other transition. Right around the time of F the Police, you get The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. What is The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was when there was a major culture shift happening. Because you had, on the one hand, you have The Cosby Show, you have Family Matters. Then you have Philip Banks, probably one of the most powerful black people depicted on television up until that point. He was, at least in a sitcom. Okay, he was a Supreme Court judge in the show. And to contrast that, you have Willie from Philly, all right? Who was, the goofy kind of Joker, archetypal, whatever, black character who makes a joke of everything. And there was a few episodes where him and Carlton went at it. And, basically, Will was coming at it from the very progressive, liberal, roots, grassroots kind of perspective. And Carlton was, the silver spoon, conservative perspective, Ivy League type thing. There was some clashes there. But that was really the turning point. And a lot of people, you don't realize the power that a sitcom can have on the masses. The power for that to shape human behavior and human interaction. It's all done through television. I'm not saying it's by design or it's like a conspiracy or anything, but it definitely has that effect. The power of television and movies to change culture is massive, absolutely massive, because you're in a passive mode when you're absorbing it. It's not like when you watch a documentary or when you're in school, when you're thinking critically about what you're seeing, you're just passively absorbing this information, and you're so much stuff is entering your mind unconsciously that you're seeing on the screen with the mannerisms and the norms and the mores and all that, that you don't even realize some of this stuff which is, unconsciously being or subliminally affecting you. So that's why it's such a powerful thing. That's why native advertising is so powerful. When you see like a Domino's pizza, that's why they pay millions of dollars to put like half a Coke logo in a movie, because they know that has way more. If you like the character and they're drinking a Coke, that goes deep into your unconscious. That's going to make you want to go buy a Coke. You're not going to know why you want that thing. You just do because you associate it with the hero. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that the situation is far more nuanced, and I'm confident that the more and more videos I do like this, I'm shaking off a lot of the one-track minded folks who aren't really willing to go to these levels of thought. And not many people are. I'll give you another example of cultural manipulation that's going on, because there's definitely a culture war between these two groups, the poor people versus I can't remember, there was an Orwell quote once. It was like the middle class use the poor to overthrow the rich, and then they keep I can't remember what it was, but it was something along those lines. But anyways, when I was in academia 10, 15 years ago, all of these ideas that you're hearing up now, they were avant-garde ideas at the time. Okay, so a lot of these people who think that they're doing something new and revolutionary, and and they really don't have the intellectual foundation to defend any of these ideas. In the higher echelons of academia, this stuff was commonplace years ago. I mean, they've had this thing called the implicit association test invented in Harvard University for decades now. It basically measures your implicit unconscious bias towards anything, and it's scientifically validated. It's probably one of the few things in psychology, at least in like a perceptual social psychology, which has a lot of scientific validity behind it. But go check it out. Go check out implicit association test if you want to see how biased you are towards anything, whether it's a cupcake or a black person or, a person who wears a dress or whatever. And even if you look at this whole red pill movement, like people act like this whole red pill thing is new. But 10 years ago, taking the red pill, it wasn't associated with conservatism. It was just, they've kind of commandeered that, but it used to mean you're just an honest seeker of truth. That's all it meant. And the idea of using a metaphor that was invented or created by Hollywood, who was probably progressive in a lot of ways, the Wachowski brothers or whatever, I'm sure that they lean left on a lot of issues, to use their metaphor that they created to proclaim yourself to be, more enlightened or more aware of what's going on, and all these other sheep are asleep. It's kind of stupid, if you ask me, because the truth is, real truth, these whole political things that we've slapped on each other, these are new creations that have only been created in last few hundred years. Before that, there was no such thing as a conservative or a liberal. There was a tyrannical king who was trying to kill you and take all your stuff, and that's about it. And maybe there was people who liked the king and there was people who didn't, So maybe you could argue that there was still that dialectic, but it wasn't like it is today. And so just bear in mind that when you see these videos of these rallies where they got one side of the street, it's, people waving the Confederate flag and, the MAGA hats and all that. And on the other side, you got the BLM. That's what they want. They want us to all fight. Because I really do fear that this fall, we're literally on the brink of everything. I don't want to say we're on the brink of civil war, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. There's going to be clashes, but you're going to get martial law before you ever get some kind of civil unrest of that magnitude. The government's going to step in and just do what the government does, no matter who's in power. because really they're all in the same team at the end of the day. But if the superbug does mutate and become more infectious in young people, like most pandemics come in those waves, then that is going to burst the market bubble. I think it's going to go sideways primarily. There's going to be volatility. So I'm going to say don't panic if you are locked into something and you see the numbers going down. If you have your money invested in good quality companies, then in the long run, you'll probably get your money back on those shares. But in the short term, yeah, it's gonna suck for sure. But I think we're going to see a lot of manipulation going on in the next, couple months. There's going to be more stimulus to try to keep it propped up. And, Jerome Powell will come out and say something that people like. And then all of a sudden the Dow will go up 2,000 points. But that can only go on so long because the fundamentals do not justify the stock market as it is today. And it is going to pop. It's got to go down at some point. It's got to go back down to those levels where it was at in March, at least. I think personally, this is my personal opinion, that's really where we kind of are right now. And if the COVID hits again and there's more violence in the streets in the coming months, then lockdown or not, our economy is going to suffer a lot and things are just going to get very, very bad. So dig your well before you're thirsty. Make sure you might be prepared for what might be coming up the road here. So thanks for watching, guys, and listening here. Hopefully I didn't trigger anybody, but if I did, maybe that's a good thing because maybe that'll get you to think a bit more deeply about some of the preconceptions you have. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. Your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER. All one word in all caps.